Brest Fortress, the truth about the first days of the war. The pre-dawn hour of June 22nd. Early morning, June 22nd, 1941. The last peaceful minutes for thousands of Soviet soldiers and their families living in the garrison of the Brest Fortress. They are asleep, unaware that history is about to break down their door with fire and steel. At 4:15 Moscow time, the first German reconnaissance units crossed into Soviet territory, and at 4:45 a.m., the silence was torn apart by a deafening roar. This was not just an artillery barrage, this was a hurricane of fire. The truth about the start of the Great Patriotic War is that it began with devastating and sudden force. The German Operation Barbarossa commenced with a strike of a scale the world had not yet seen. The Brest Fortress was hit by artillery, more than 600 guns, Nebelwerfer rocket launchers, Ju-87 Stuka dive bombers. The goal was singular: to prevent the garrison from recovering, to destroy it within the first hours, to wipe it off the face of the earth. Shock and chaos. The first hours of hell. The truth of the first hours is chaos and shock. Imagine sleeping barracks hit by shells. People die without understanding what is happening. Communications were destroyed almost instantly. There was no unified command, no orders. Commanders were killed or isolated in their sectors. The German 45th Infantry Division, with extensive experience from the war in Europe, began its assault. They were confident the fortress would fall in a few hours. Their plans called for the rapid capture of bridges, barracks, and the citadel. But here begins the second truth, the truth about the Soviet soldier. In this inferno, some did not succumb to panic. Officers, sergeants, privates. They banded together into small, desperate groups led by a lieutenant or even a sergeant. They took up defensive positions in basements, casemates, and behind surviving walls. Their motto became the words later scratched on a wall: "I am dying, but I do not surrender. Farewell, motherland." Pockets of resistance, where they stalled to the death. The defense of the Brest Fortress was not a single battle, but hundreds of small, isolated pockets of resistance. Let's walk through them. The Eastern Fort. This was one of the most impregnable strongpoints. It was commanded by Major Pyotr Gavrilov. The Germans could not take the fort for several days. They threw artillery, aircraft, and infantry against it. But the handful of fighters under Gavrilov's command held their ground to the death, the citadel and the Terespol Gate. The defense here was led by Regimental Commissar Yefim Fomin. As a political officer, he took command in the first hours and organized a fierce defense. The fighting at the Terespol Gate was particularly brutal. The Kobrin fortification. Here, the families of the commanders fought. Women and children who just yesterday were civilians now helped the wounded and carried ammunition under fire. The Germans suffered unexpectedly high casualties. Their reports from the first days are full of bewilderment. The Russians are putting up fanatical resistance, fighting for every stone. Tactics and reality. How the defenders fought back. How was it possible to defend under such conditions? The truth is, the defenders used everything. 1. Sudden counterattacks and bayonet charges. The Germans were used to large-scale maneuver warfare. Here, in the ruins, they faced fierce bayonet charges from around corners, from basements. 2. Sniper fire. The Soviet soldiers had Mosin rifles and some had sniper variants. They inflicted significant casualties on the enemy's officers. 3. limited resources. They captured ammunition and food in battle. Water had to be fetched at night under fire, crawling to the Mukhavets River. Many died right there by the water. 4. Psychological pressure. The Germans tried to persuade them to surrender, used intimidation, and dropped barrels of flammable mixture from aircraft. But the answer was always more gunfire. By the end of the first week, the Germans realized frontal assaults were too costly. They began methodically destroying the pockets of resistance with explosives, flamethrowers, and gas, the price of heroism and memory. The truth about the Brest Fortress is the truth of incredible courage and a terrible price. Officially, the fortress fell on June 30th, but individual pockets of resistance held out until the end of July. There is evidence that the last defenders were found by the Germans in August. The losses of the German 45th Division in the first week of fighting near Brest amounted to about 5% of its personnel killed and wounded, very high figures for the Wehrmacht at that time. Most of the defenders were killed or captured. Very few survived, like Major Gavrilov, who was later found unconscious in one of the casemates. But the main monument is the inscriptions on the walls, found after the war. I am dying, but I do not surrender. There were 5 of us. It was hard for us. We are dying. These words are not propaganda. They are voices from the past, the voices of those who fulfilled their duty to the end. The defense of the Brest Fortress did not change the course of the war, but it changed its spirit. It showed the Germans that the Russian soldier was not like the opponents they had met in Europe. This was the first act of the great tragedy and the great feat that would last for 1,418 days. Conclusion: the lessons of Brest. Today, the Brest Fortress is a vast memorial. People come here to pay tribute to its courage. The truth about those days teaches us one main lesson. Even in conditions of complete chaos, without communication or command, a person can make a choice. The choice to stand, the choice to fight, the choice to die, but not surrender. This is not a story about generals and global strategies. This is a story about ordinary people, infantrymen, artillerymen, border guards, their wives and children, who found themselves in the epicenter of hell in an instant and found the strength to fight back. They forced the whole world to speak of them with respect and laid the first, most terrible, and most heroic stone in the foundation of the future victory. Remember, this really happened.